Hi everybody. Well, the very least I can do for one of my New Year's videos is to offer you a few laughs. Have a look at this ludicrous video.
Did I tell you what's happening at work?
No.
They're hiring a new CEO.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, but he said it's a woman.
That's great. Cool.
There's no way a woman can run such a large company. Women are just too emotional to lead. You know what it's like in big businesses? It's competitive. I don't think a woman can handle it.
Isn't that extraordinary? So now it's seen as domestic violence to suggest that women may not make good CEOs. What sort of Stasi land are we living in now? This frightening little video is made by Our Watch, which is a largely government-funded Australian organisation aimed at ending violence towards women and their children. Our Watch gets over $6 million in government grants and spends $1.3 million annually on such dubious advertising campaigns. These people are simply bonkers. Look at this explanation from their website, talking about what they see as disrespect for women. Namely, anything that makes a woman feel humiliated, belittled, or like she's thought less of because she's a woman. And they include in their examples thinking or saying that women can't do all the same jobs as men. So here we have our thought police telling us that you're not even allowed to think of women, that women can't do the same jobs as men. Never mind that that's actually the truth. Men are on average far bigger and stronger than most women, which is why they've had to lower the fitness requirements for women entering the police force or the fire brigade or the army, so we can pretend that women are capable of the same physical requirements once mandatory for these jobs. There's a great little video from Israel where feminists are shouting down a man who's trying to inform a Knesset committee on the underperformance, the injury rate and compensation suits of female soldiers. He has to battle against howls of protest from the feminists as he explains that 46% of Israel's combat soldiers are injured in training, and many then sue the government for compensation.
זה לא אמת? זה לא אמת? מאיפה את יודעת? בדקת?
But the real reason I wanted to show you that video is late last year I spoke in Parliament House, courtesy of David Leyonhjelm. Talking to key people in government, I discovered the massive domestic violence funding handed out by Malcolm Turnbull as one of his first acts as Prime Minister, more than 100 million, is supposed to dry up this year. Naturally, the huge domestic violence industry supported by that funding is in a frenzy, lobbying the government and claiming they're doing a wonderful job preventing domestic violence against women. My sources tell me they're keen for evidence as to whether this money was being wisely spent. They only ever hear from one side, namely the bloated feminist bureaucracy that's being supported by that funding all over Australia, and the Twitter sphere that supports them. So the government never gets to see the research showing that most family violence is two-way violence involving both male and female perpetrators. They never get to hear from the male victims of violence, the men and women growing up with violent mothers, the social workers, police, psychologists and counsellors who see what's actually happening in violent homes. People who know the government is being fed porkies about this all being due to dangerous men disrespecting women. And that's where you all come in. I'm going to be providing the relevant ministers with all the data I have about the true nature of domestic violence and what we can do to actually reduce it. But I hope many of you can supplement this with relevant research, with evidence about our flawed ideological model that's underpinning our domestic violence policies. In particular, it would be great if we had overseas research on effective methods of properly addressing the problem in all its complexity. I'd love you to write carefully well-written letters to your local MP and the Minister for Women, Kelly O'Dwyer, voicing your concern about the waste of public funding, the offensive one-sided campaigns which ignore women's violence and fail to protect children. I'll put details on my Facebook page and my website, giving you information that might be helpful. We have to get active if we're going to give the government the courage to resist the feminist lobbying and the evidence to take on their arguments. I'd also like you to send in some brief summaries of some of your personal stories about your own experiences with violence, which challenge the feminist groupthink. Don't send huge volumes, just a carefully written page or two, telling the other side of the story. And tell the government why you find their campaigns offensive and inaccurate. Now, let me quickly give you a few pointers. The federal government spent over $30 million on another advertising campaign promoting the idea that domestic violence is all about respect for women. Remember the little boy slamming the door in the girl's face?
Come on, you're okay.
Yeah, I know, Mum. It's just what boys do.
Our excuses allow violence against women to grow. Let's stop it at the start. Authorised by the Australian Government, Canberra.
Now, the assumption behind that campaign is simply wrong. In egalitarian Western countries like Australia, there's no proper evidence that domestic violence is caused by disrespect for women and gender inequality. Over the past year or two, Senator David Leyonhjelm has been grilling bureaucrats and Senate estimates committees about their failure to produce evidence supporting the assertion that gender equity is what's at the heart of the domestic violence problem. Leyonhjelm does a great job tearing apart the references presented to him by the public servants and proves they don't show any such thing. Here he is going through a WHO report that they'd cited, and he points out that it names a whole range of factors that contribute to domestic violence. Low income, low education, sexual abuse, parental violence, antisocial personality, harmful use of alcohol and drugs, acceptance of violence, relationship factors, community factors, but gender inequality is not included. Funnily enough, one of the experts quoted by the bureaucrats is academic Michael Flood, who recently tweeted about a big study published in The Lancet examining data from 66 surveys in 44 countries. The funny thing is this large study came up with a list of societal norms associated with increased domestic violence against women. Norms like this: acceptance of male authority over female behaviour, norms justifying wife beating, law and practices which disadvantage women compared to men in access to land, property and other productive resources. Working for cash increases a woman's risk in countries where few women are employed. Now note something interesting, none of these societal attitudes or norms or conditions apply in Australia or the UK or the US or other egalitarian countries. The underlying basis for the massive government expenditure on domestic violence in this country is totally wrong. There's heaps of solid international research denouncing this feminist analysis of domestic violence. I'll put links on my website, and I've included some of my key articles on domestic violence that come from my new book, #Men2, which include updates on some of this latest research. So where was our National Press Gallery when David Leyonhjelm exposed all this in Senate estimates? The answer is that our mainstream media is almost entirely captured by feminist dogma. They're only interested in feeding the cash cow that is our huge domestic violence industry, not exposing the fraud that underpins it. That's why the government agencies get away with churning out the same tired old line. Here's one of their more recent campaigns, released last year, even after David Leyonhjelm's good work, proving attitudes to women aren't the cause of domestic violence in this country.
Come on then. What happened?
Got detention, just for flicking up a girl's skirt.
What? That's it?
Doesn't she know that's just boys being boys?
Yeah, I mean, I've already accepted that as I grow up, I'll probably be harassed and even abused.
Sorry. That's not what I meant.
Authorised by the Australian Government, Canberra.
What's really outrageous is that our government throws away hundreds of millions of dollars paying feminist organisations to promote lies about domestic violence, while the real problem is not being properly addressed. More children are growing up in violent homes and the cycle continues. And there are real solutions to some of the underlying problems which are being totally ignored. Peter Miller is Professor of Violence Prevention and Addiction Studies at Deakin University. 4 years ago, Professor Miller gave evidence to the Victorian Royal Commission on Domestic Violence, in which he outlined many of the successful approaches being taken overseas to address the role of alcohol in fueling family violence. I'll include Miller's evidence on my website, but naturally the Royal Commission ignored this evidence and promoted only the usual feminist dogma. It's time for the silenced majority to be heard. Let's start a campaign to respect everybody, not just women, to stand up against violence against everybody, not just women. I need lots of help from women to help with this one. Mothers of sons and women who care about the men in their lives. Unfortunately, it's far easier for women to be heard on this issue than it is for men. Please contact me if you'd like to help. And in the meantime, start writing to your members of parliament or to Kelly O'Dwyer, the Minister for Women, and tell her you want our government to work towards ending all family violence. Let's see if we can achieve some evidence-based domestic violence funding and starve that bloated feminist cash cow.